So good morning, everyone. My name is Anna Siefken, and I'm with the Scott Institute for Energy Innovation at Carnegie Mellon University. Welcome to our continued Fall 2021 Distinguished Lecture Series. I am thrilled with our guest today, but before we get started with the introductions, I'm going to give you a little bit of information about us at the Scott Institute. So for those of you who I have not met, I'm Anna Siefken. I'm the executive director, and I would love to connect with you. It's a great way to follow what we're working on and see our upcoming events and the projects, the research we're working on. But there are also ways to just get in touch with the Scott Institute. So many of you received information about this webinar and our other lectures and workshops through our newsletter. So make sure that you sign up for our newsletter on the front page of our website. Other ways to follow us, we're always interested in hearing from you. So what is the Scott Institute? We serve as the research hub at Carnegie Mellon University for all things energy. So be it research, strategic partnerships, education of our students, entrepreneurship. We have a special kind of interest in innovation. And our overarching goal is a sustainable, lower carbon energy future. So we have a lot of programming coming up this fall. Now that students are back in class, welcome back, all of you students, if this is your first lecture this fall. And it's a full schedule. So we have a faculty member, Valerie Carplus, who is a new associate professor with us. She's going to be talking with EFI's Ernie Moniz on October 14. On the 26th, we have the National Renewable Energy Laboratory Director, Martin Keller, who should be on campus. Fingers crossed that that actually happens, but it will definitely be virtual. Siemens Energy's Richard Vorberg is doing a both virtual and in-person event November 2nd. On the 9th, we have Catherine Hamilton, who many people know from the Energy Gang, who's going to be talking about the impact of public policy on clean energy transition. On November 16th, another distinguished lecture by another CMU alum, Sukshi Talati, who's the Chief of Staff of the DOE's Office of Fossil Energy, will be joining us virtually. And then finally, it's not the last of the event, it's the last I'm going to mention today. We have a new event that's coming up focused on investing in clean tech with Breakthrough Energy Ventures, Wireframe VC, and the Collaborative Fund. So stay tuned. All of the information about registering for all of our events is on our website, cmu.edu/energy. So one quick sort of sidebar before we get started, I want to remind you that we are a power connector for the American-Made Solar Prize. And October 5th is the deadline. There are 2 tracks for any of you who have innovations. We can be your power connector, which means we can help you with mentoring and team support to help you understand how to navigate that program. So in this hardware track, the software track, both due on October 5th. So there's a lot of information that you can find online about the Solar Prize, and it will help you determine whether you are a hardware or a software company. So related, there's also a new tool called a network matching tool. So this is interesting for those of you who could support teams. You can actually register yourself as a supporting member through this network matching. And teams will get in touch with you for skills development, for teaming opportunities, et cetera. So take a look at that as well. So now I'm going to stop my screen share and introduce you to Britney McCoy. So 1 second, please. So Britney McCoy is the director of the Climate Analysis and Strategy Center within the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Transportation and Air Quality. She's also a distinguished CMU alumna. So in this role, she's responsible for leading the office future-focused thinking regarding climate pollutants and advanced clean transportation technology options to achieve significant greenhouse gas reductions for transportation sources in the medium and long term. She specializes in advanced clean technology opportunities in transportation, diesel engine after-treatment retrofits, EPA's Clean School Bus Program, and black carbon emissions in the Arctic. So as the director of the Educational Experiences for STEMly, a nonprofit advocacy organization, she works to create bridges to STEM fields for underrepresented student populations in Washington, D.C. Her life's motto is, "I'm simply trying to create some meaning out of life while improving the environment and changing lives at the same time," which I love. So she holds a PhD in engineering and public policy and an MS in environmental management and science from Carnegie Mellon University, and a BA in engineering and government and law from Lafayette College. So welcome, Britney. Before she shares her screen, because I know she's going to do that to show us a presentation this morning, I do want to remind you that you can use the Q&A on this Zoom platform to let us know questions that you might have. So with that, turning it over to you, Britney.
Thanks, Anna. I appreciate it. Thank you guys for having me. I'm going to jump straight into it and start sharing my screen. Hopefully you should see it any second now, and hopefully in presentation mode.
It's in presentation mode.
Perfect. Thanks. So I do have to give a disclaimer that this talk and document is representative of my views and not necessarily official EPA policy positions of the agency. But I will talk about a lot of the work I do here. But before that, I want to kind of jump into just kind of a timeline, starting my time at Carnegie Mellon and to now, where I joined the EPP program, Engineering and Public Policy Department in 2005. Had a lot of advisors, but my primary were Paul, Mitch, and Peter. And then also I had Liz Kasman as well as an advisor while at Carnegie Mellon. And then my first encounter with EPA was in 2009 when I interned for the National Center of Environmental Economics, which was a really good opportunity to kind of work on EJ issues from looking at environmental policy, how environmental justice was included in environmental policy issues for this particular center. Then I finished my time at Carnegie Mellon in 2010, as well as started teaching at Georgetown in the college prep program there. I did that for about 6 years at Georgetown, and at the same time was also working at EPA and started in the Office of Transportation and Air Quality in 2011. And then in 2015, still while working at EPA, some friends and I formed this nonprofit called STEMly that Anna mentioned, and we focus on STEM education and do scholarships for high school students to attend STEM camps in the summer. So, but now I was a kind of a general engineer, that is the official government term, when I started in the agency. And then as of late, just the last month or two, I came on as a director of the Climate Analysis and Strategy Center here, still in the Office of Transportation and Air Quality. So that's kind of been my background, for lack of a better way of putting it. But today's discussion will kind of merge various aspects of my professional life, most of it focused on a lot of the stuff at EPA. But I wanted to kind of show this timeline because it's all interconnected. So I don't want to get in too many weeds, but this is when I first started with the agency. I spent a lot of time focused on diesel retrofits. Much of my early 2010 work focused on cleaning up transportation from a heavy duty perspective. And I have these three components here in the middle where we talk about the Energy Policy Act of 2005, which basically the Diesel Emissions Reduction Act was a part of that Energy Policy Act, where it authorizes funding to help reduce diesel emissions. So it helps fleet owners be able to pay to reduce diesel emissions. So you may hear me mention DERA, or you may even heard DERA, the term, before, if you've been following the news or policies. And it's definitely in this new infrastructure bill that may or may not get passed. And then from the Energy Policy Act and in DERA, they emphasize the Clean School Bus Program to be emphasized in that program, meaning funding to be prioritized for school buses and reducing emissions that children are exposed to related to school bus funding. And then that's where the retrofit program comes in, when we install devices essentially to help reduce emissions from those diesel buses. I'm using buses as an example, but any heavy duty piece of equipment or vehicle. But the goal of this program overall, which we called back in the day the National Clean Diesel Program, was kind of to reduce emissions from what we call the legacy fleet, older engines and vehicles, which we had over 11 million. Now we have over 10 million, but the original goal was 11 million. And it focused on 5 sectors: school buses, ports, construction, agriculture, and freight. I worked on all 5, but primarily I was really laser focused on school buses and ports. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about those before I get into what I'm doing now. So that's to kind of give you a general gist. With the Clean School Bus Program, this was kind of my baby. If you guys have attended any of my talks in the past, especially at CMU, you know that I spent at least 6-7 years working on the Clean School Bus USA program, where it focused on retrofitting buses with these emission control technologies, replacing older buses, which pre-2007 mean pre-2007 model year, and then focusing on reducing idling and reinforcing smart driving practices. So this is a program that's been around since 2003, and it's a program that is still favored bipartisan within Congress. So it's a very much favorite program, regardless of what administration's in office, which is great. So I'm not going to get into the details of this, but I've done a couple of posters and research papers and white papers associated with all of our DERA work and related to school buses. But this one basically focused on like how most of our grants have been, at least a third of our grants have been focused on clean school bus projects over the last 10 plus years. And so this poster I did back in 2005 with a colleague. Actually, Christine Kester is also a Carnegie Mellon alum in the Hines School as well. She also works at EPA with me here, which is great. And then this other poster is a more recent one I did. Actually produced this in 2018, but the work will hopefully get published in this year. We'll see. Where focused on just kind of understanding the legacy distribution and what states have some of the more higher concentrations of what I would say of like older school buses, and how has DERA funding, our funding, helped support reducing the population of those older buses. So this is kind of give you a general gist of a lot of my early work. Then around 2017, 2018 or so, my work shifted again. I focused on, so although I was, kind of an engineer, I focused on retrofitting, I focused on evaluating those technologies, I focused on understanding the DERA program, I focused on school buses. Around 2017, 2018, right after I did a detail, my work shifted to more advanced clean transportation efforts. So then I started to hone in on ports, and then I started to hone in on electrification. We think about battery, electric, and fuel cells, and then community engagement in order to kind of implement some of these technologies. So I'm just going to give you a little bit about the ports initiative work. This group, and we have a website. If you type in EPA Ports Initiative in Google, you'll be able to find it. But the Ports Initiative group was developed because stakeholders simply just asked EPA to do more. We've been trying to. This is a voluntary program, so a lot of my work revolved around voluntary work. So EPA, as you know, I got to pause for a second, is a regulatory agency. However, my group in the center I've been working in, and the division I've been working in, is more the voluntary programs of EPA versus the regulatory aspect of things. A lot of our work helps supports regulations, but we're not driven by regulations. So the Ports Initiative is a voluntary effort. And it's been something that's been going on since 2013. So where we try to increase the communication as well as emissions reduction overall just at ports between the communities, the stakeholders, and regulatory agencies, whether it be state, local, or federal. And then one aspect of the Ports Initiative is the technical resources. And this is the part that I kind of focused on, where we help port authorities and other entities identify basically good, clean air investments. And so here's some examples, some reports that I've worked on, and that others in my division and agency here at EPA have worked on as well, just to kind of give you a sense. One of my more recent reports that is hopefully to be released this fall is fuel cells at ports. It's an assessment of fuel cell technologies at ports. And this is what I would call my baby, a project that I kind of led for about 3 or 4 years. We developed a report that characterized fuel cell technology at ports and how they can best utilize. So we focused on highway vehicles, which would be drayage trucks, for example, We focused on marine applications, non-road applications, which would be like forklifts and other material handling equipment, as well as rail, so like switcher locomotives, and all figuring out how we can reduce diesel emissions, as significantly as possible. And so here's an example of like some of the things to look at where we figure out where we are in demonstration phase versus pilot phase or commercial phase. And as you can see, we're still in very much demonstration phase for a lot of applications related to fuel cells. But things are progressing very, very well, especially in the forklift and transit bus area. And one thing I wanted to highlight is like, well, why would EPA be interested in some of this? One, we want to understand hydrogen, and we want to understand fuel cells as to kind of keeping a pulse of what's going on in the market. And then how can we best help port authorities and truck operators and communities figure out what they need to know. And then when will fuel cells be commercially available? These are all things that we're very concerned with. And then once we kind of figure that out, we want to provide users with the confidence that the technology will work as expected. And so we don't necessarily provide funding for research, but we will do our own research. We don't necessarily provide funding, unlike maybe DOE, for others to come in and do research. And then at the end, our DERA program, our Diesel Emissions Reduction Act that I've said in the beginning, we offer funding to assist with market-ready fuel cell technology. So not demonstration ready, but market ready. And so that's kind of a little background, just to kind of show you a few photos of my experience here at the agency, a little bit of a quick background of some of the work I've kind of done in the past, probably 8 years or so, or 9 years or so here at the agency. I didn't get a chance to talk about the Black carbon work, but that'll be maybe for another time. But here's some candid shots of me kind of in the field between those different positions and roles. So, and now let's talk about now. So my work shifted again recently from thinking more from a criteria pollutant aspect of things to more of a climate perspective, with thinking about electrification and shared mobility and autonomous vehicles, micromobility. And then, so been responsible for thinking about OTAC as our Office of Transportation Air Quality, thinking about our office's future focused thinking as it relates to climate pollutants and thinking about advanced clean transportation. And what does that mean in the future? And so this has been the big question that I've been focused on, is thinking about the future of transportation as of late. So let me just do a quick background. I never know, everyone's baseline. So I always kind of like to ask these questions or think about this stuff, weather versus climate. Climate change basically describes a change in the average conditions, such as temperature, rainfall in a region over a period of time. And weather just describes what's happening right now, right? And so I like this image because it gives a perfect example. This glacier between 41 and 2004 of melting that has happened as a result of climate change. I had an opportunity a couple of years ago, and I visited Alaska to see the same glacier. And then within that 1 year, it had already melted 1 nautical mile. So you can kind of see in some parts of the country, firsthand experience of the impacts of climate change. So then that brings me back to like what some of the current things I'm thinking about as the two aspects I think of things we think about here at EPA, the sources of transportation and air pollution. So I look at on-road and non-road. So thinking about all those different vehicles for the on-road, and then all the different pieces of equipment, as well as vehicles in the non-road categories. And then the solutions for transportation, air pollution. In the past, we focused a lot on the catalytic converters in the early days, and fuel standards and engine technologies. But I think now we're thinking more about alternative vehicle technologies and better transportation planning versus the more earlier days of our work. And then how do those emissions reductions equate to cleaner air and better health? But let me tell you a little bit about my group. So my group is CAST, that's our name, Climate Analysis and Strategy Center. We consist of a couple engineers, a couple policy folks, and then a few scientists all on the team. So a fairly, as diverse as we can be, background of folks work on all of these issues. And so I'm just going to kind of walk through quickly some of the things that my group and my team were responsible for. We do a lot on consumer information of electric vehicles. So EPA updated some of the calculations for manufacturers to determine their fuel economy label value. So you may have seen this label here on the left on if you ever try to find a new car or on the sticker of a new car, or even like at the auto show. I don't know if you guys have that in Pittsburgh or not, but I feel like you do. I think there is one there. But anyway, we work on some updating these numbers, the fuel economy here, the annual fuel cost, the savings, the fuel economy and greenhouse gas rating. We work on providing accurate numbers for that and estimating the total greenhouse gas emissions associated with driving an electric vehicle, plug-in vehicle, and so forth. All of this information can be found on our fueleconomy.gov website, which we do in partnership with the Department of Transportation. So you see on the label it says EPA, then DOT. So that's a joint federal government website. And also we have the Beyond Tailpipe Emissions Calculator that we can see up here as well that can estimate the emissions associated with your vehicle. And then the site that my group runs solely is the Green Vehicle Guide. If you get a chance, check it out, epa.gov/green vehicles. Opportunity to just see various different documents on our site associated with EVs, plug-in hybrids, and plug-in electric vehicles as well. And so I already mentioned the fuel economy website, but this is a screenshot of kind of what it looks like. You can learn about different cars and before you purchase, or even if you already have, a car. But it's basically you informing the public about fuel economy. And then also we have a thing called SmartWay Vehicle that we manage as well, where we help the public understand light duty greenhouse gas emissions and fuel economy. And then also we do this thing called the EPA Automotive Trends Report. And it's a report we publish every year that's devoted to understanding also emissions, also auto manufacturers' performance in meeting the agency's maybe greenhouse gas emission standards. And so that report is published and it provides information pretty much every vehicle, light duty vehicle that is available. And then another thing that's on our Green Vehicle Guide website, if you check it out, is we have this app, well, app is probably not the best word, but maybe calculating tool called the True, GVG is Green Vehicle Guide, the True Cost of Ownership. And it's referenced often, and the more recent reference we found was on a Charles Schwab website, where you understand the true cost of owning a vehicle, which consists more than just the sticker price. And so you use that calculation to kind of estimate. So it's nice to see when our stuff is referenced. Another thing that's on our Green Vehicle Guide site that I really love are our what if papers. Basically, these are papers that were designed to stimulate conversations about greenhouse gas reductions from transportation. So they're really short, usually 1 or 2 pages, and they're on a wide variety of topics. We actually just started these papers maybe in the last couple of years. And the focus is on what's the bottom line and what would things be like? So for example, what if one of your cars were electric? What would the impact be? What if airplanes look like stingrays? What would the impact be from a greenhouse gas perspective? So we pose these scenarios that could likely be real life scenarios. So another thing we keep track of is understanding transportation's impact and greenhouse gas emissions. So we know right now, according to the 2019 report on greenhouse gas contributions, that transportation sector is accounted for the largest portion of emissions. And then when you dig into the transportation sector here on the right, you can see light duty obviously is still more than half, but that medium and heavy duty aircraft and others are expected to rise as well over time, especially when regulations for light duty become more stringent. So now, one of the things we've been charged with thinking about is electrification. This is actually photos from our Ann Arbor location. EPA has a testing facility in Ann Arbor, and we have several EV charging stations at our facility there. But this is, one of the things we have been forced to think about was electrification. And so now I think about the growth of electrification and what that has meant. We know that EV sales are up a little more than 2%. And in California is in some cases as high as 7-8%. And some of that is really because battery costs are down. So Battery cost has been the biggest hindrance to EVs and their price, but battery costs are down 80% in the last 10 years. And then, there's a lot more research. A lot of manufacturers have committed to spending nearly $3 billion in development and EVs and infrastructure as well. So, for example, you will be able to buy an electric Ford F-150 as early as 2021, I think by the end of this year, if not already available. I know our administrator recently drove one when he was at the Ford facility in Detroit. And then there's more selections that we identify. Ford and GM are now getting on board. But there's this prediction, at least by Bloomberg, that we'll see an increase in PEV and BEV technologies by 2040. And then there's this impact. One of the things we try to think about are the impact of electric vehicles, really not just from the tailpipe, because we know that's near zero, but also as we think about the source of energy and how that's impacting. So this is a nice graphic that I like that shows the environmental impacts of charging EVs, how they vary based on where you are in the country. So it's very dependent on your locality, and it's changing over time. This map is likely out of date already, but it's a constant change of where things are and what your gasoline vehicle would need to do to produce less CO2 than an EV in your area. So the other thing we've been focused on is predictions and estimations of where we see EVs, and not just where we see them, where we think they should be, especially if we want to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. So not just based on individual will, but also how individuals should be pushed rather to acquire BEV technologies. So we're still hoping to see a 40% increase in BEV new car sales. 40% of new car sales by 2040 being BEV technologies. However, we still know that more than 60% of vehicle stock will still be gasoline, which could be troubling, depending on how you look at it. So this is the big question that I'm tasked with thinking about now, is where will we be in 25 years? And so a lot of folks have a lot of things to say, but these are from some of our top manufacturers where they believe things will be all electric, or EVs are the future. And these are all great, great notions. And then you even have folks like at Lyft, where they say they're working towards, producing more electrical, even autonomous vehicles by 2025, and that we're moving more toward a shared space in that. So it's nice to see that various companies are thinking about some of these things, and our job is to kind of keep track of a lot of that. And then thinking more about efficient options. So, what is ideal in the future? We focused on miles traveled, thinking about more efficient operation. So these are all the things we're thinking about. But I think one of the things I want to highlight is that it's not just for light duty vehicles. Thinking about what's happening with shipping, what's happening in the agriculture and mining sector, what's happening in transit, lawnmowers, and even local delivery. And some of these things will work out, some may fail, but we do expect that some of these things will be coming in the near future. And so this is the transformational change that's needed, that we see, that we need this 80% emissions reduction. And so we're committed to thinking about this and pushing internally to figure out what, whether it be policy or voluntary programs that we need to implement to ensure this happens. But given the Biden administration's increased interest in equity, that's another key component as we think about equity in transportation. And this is the big research question we plan to address. I recently started my job, so these are things I'm still thinking about, and definitely open to ideas as I go along the way. And what I do know is that this is going to require a shift in how we think. We tend to think own, gasoline, and human driven, and we're now forced to think about shared electric and autonomous. So thinking about today's challenges, there's a lot, everything is increasingly urban, aging, the population of vehicles are aging, congestion, a lot of money is lost to congestion. We have fatalities each year. related to, automobiles. And then we know that people spend almost $10,000 a year on transportation. And then, failing infrastructure is also a key component of some of the challenges we have to think about. But overall, my group, CAST, the Center of Climate Analysis and Strategies, these are some of the key things we've been committed to doing, thinking about, our external stuff, our green vehicle guide trends and what if papers, and then offering some technical expertise along the way as well, and then collaborating across government, not just in EPA, and then thinking about emerging trends. And then, of course, supporting all the offices here at the agency. But the last thing I want to lead you with, I know I kind of zoomed through it really quickly, but this is kind of give you a glimpse of some key questions that I am thinking about. We don't have the answers just yet, but these are things on the forefront of our radar. As I said, I just stepped into the role, so I'm just, kind of getting started. But the main thing is informing the public about fuel economy and providing a glimpse of what the future, providing a glimpse into the future and what the future can be. So we think about metrics. What is a good outcome and how do you measure it? Thinking about data. What data should we be collecting? And are there partnerships we should be pursuing? Modeling. How can we account for the future in transportation EPA model? So such as our MOVES model. I didn't get into the MOVES model, but that's just an example. And then regulations. What is EPA's regulatory role in an evolving future? So these are all the questions that my group has been, kind of tasked with thinking about. And this is the last slide here. There's some resources that I think that are useful as we think about these things that we found, useful. We have a lot of connections with NREL and Oak Ridge in particular, and Berkeley Lab as well. Thinking about smart mobility with the DOE. Thinking about DOT's mobility on demand. I think that's a great resource as well. Of course, the Green Vehicle Guide is a great resource. And then we do several webinars on state, local, and tribal webinars that is available to the public that is useful. And that's pretty much it. I'm open to any questions that you guys may have or any thoughts you may have as well. I'll turn it back over to Anna.
Fantastic. Brittany, we have a lot of questions coming in, so we'll get to those pretty quickly. First off, if you stop sharing, you've been sharing, but if you'll actually stop sharing, there we go. So we've had a couple of good questions that are coming in, so please continue to put your questions in. I have a question that has come in that I think is actually fascinating because, and it's from one of our students who is saying that their understanding of Energy Star, so the Energy Star labeling program, is that it helped change the way consumers shopped by making energy efficiency a desirable quality. So are there ways that EPA is changing consumer and social behavior without directly appealing to climate change in the environment, which seems as politically fraught as ever? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it is a tough one. I don't work on Energy Star, so I work on transportation and air quality. So my knowledge of Energy Star is from a consumer's perspective versus the integration of the program. So I can't speak to that, but I get the point of the correlation of the question. All of the work that we do is voluntary. So yeah, that's how we've been reaching the everyday person for the last 15 years here in the agency, whether it be through our Clean School Bus efforts, our Porsche Initiative efforts. And it's not just with industry, it's with folks in the community. A lot of my work spent going literally to schools, talking to school nurses, talking to school administrators about implementing things from a perspective of overall just general health, and instead of maybe from a climate perspective. That is not successful. And this is my personal statement. That is, to me, that is not a success. That is a one man or a few folks out trying to reach a few people at a time. Someone mentioned in a previous question, I know we'll probably get to it, sorry. I don't know if they were referencing the IPCC report that was leaked, but what we do know is that we can't rely on individuals to just make behavioral changes from the good of their heart. That's not working. And we need something more aggressive moving into the future. That could have worked 20 years ago. People still didn't get on board, even with something as simple as, recycling. That's the first thing that comes to hand. Or even buying energy efficient, for example, appliances. How many people actually go out and say, I only want to get an energy efficient appliance with the Energy Star rating? It's not working to appeal to people's good natured heart to want to change. What I'm learning is that it has to be driven through policy.
Great. So related to that, a question that came in earlier, which is how can the public be more involved and how can they enable an active role in policy development? So in short, how can people really help this along?
Yeah, it's a tough question, but it's all, I'm a firm believer that AI, I'm a government employee. And so I work for the government, but also for the people who support the government. And so there are a lot of ways to get involved. Is for the rules, you can have access to reviewing the rules before they become actual rules. So from our perspective, you can sign on any of our listservs, which I can probably find the links for some of those, but there's so many different ones depending on which rules you're interested in. For example, we have a light duty rule that is under review right now for the public. So the average person can come in and submit their comments, and my team has to look at the comments that are submitted from the average person, whoever is commenting. Most time it's people in industry or academics or people who are familiar in the field who comment, but anyone has the ability to offer input or to any of the rules that we propose before they become finalized. So that's one way. There are a lot of different ways. We have a lot of resources on our website. You can check out the Green Vehicle Guide website as well as our DURA website about other areas of involvement. I can only speak to my niche versus all of EPA or all of government.
Okay, more questions. And again, thank you for sending them in through Q&A. That's easier for us to track them there. So we have a question about autonomous vehicles. So why are autonomous vehicles considered part of a reduced greenhouse gas emissions future?
Because we see it as a source of the future, especially we think about autonomous in connection to being shared. So notice I didn't necessarily say only autonomous or only electric or only shared, but in the paradigm shift, I put them all as interconnected. And so we see them all as being interconnected. And the other thing is that EPA is fuel neutral. We're technology neutral. We have to consider everything as a part of our evaluation. There's, I know folks may not always agree with that, but we do have to consider everything. Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned the IPCC report. So did that have an impact, or what kind of an impact did it have on your mission and operations?
It had no impact. No, I'm just joking. Directly, the mission doesn't change. The mission is exactly what we said it was before, which is focusing on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and thinking about the climate in terms of transportation and climate future. That mission really doesn't change as much overall. Now, with the report, what it may do is, depending on, so a lot of our work, I have to pause. A lot of our work is driven by administrations at the time. So if administration is pushing in one direction, then that's usually the sway. A lot of the scientists and engineers at the agency can have their own beliefs about where things should go, but a lot of it really contends upon how far the administration wants to push it. So that part, it may have an impact, it may not. We're still in the middle of writing our rules for the heavy duty and our long-term light duty rules, which if anybody's been following news, you probably know that's still in the works. So that's still in the very early phases. It could potentially impact how stringent the rules may be. But right now, it doesn't necessarily change the vision of my group.
Okay. We have a lot of questions coming in about EVs, electric vehicles, and MicroTransit. So a question has come in related to, hold on, I'm going to sift through these. There are a lot of questions. We're not going to be able to get to all of them, but please keep sending them.
Sure. I feel like I should open it up too, so I can see what's happening.
No, that's okay. I'll do it.
Okay.
So there's an environmental impact of mining rare earth metals for batteries and battery consumption and recycling. And how does it compare to running existing fossil fuels? So do you all compare those impacts? So the impacts of mining versus burning fossil fuels?
Yes and no. So no, right now, no, my particular team does not do that, but there is another group in EPA that we work closely with that does focus on that. We've been focusing on more not necessarily the fuel focus, so like the electricity produced versus the battery aspect of things. The electricity produced as well as hydrogen production is associated with fuel cells. But that's actually a very good question, and that's something that should be consideed. But that's another group in our office, but not necessarily my group.
So a good thing for someone to recommend through that website that you were talking about before.
Absolutely, and that hopefully that will be addressed because the bill encompasses several groups who are all working together to not the bill. The rules encompasses a whole bunch of groups working together to try to write the rule. So yes.
So a question about voluntary programs. So are voluntary programs for emission reductions ever equally or more effective than regulatory requirements?
That's a tough question. It's hard to say. So personally, this is my personal perspective, not of the EPA. I believe regulatory perspectives are always more effective because I think back to what like New York City or Los Angeles or even Pittsburgh looked like before the Clean Air Act. Right. That just didn't happen because people wanted to do great and companies wanted to like reduce emissions. That happened because the Clean Air Act, have you ever seen those images of like then and now? Demonstrated what mandatory regulatory change could bring. I think voluntary programs are useful for changing hearts and minds. So there's benefits to doing them both in conjunction. And the school bus program, I think, was helpful for many states. Every state didn't take advantage of it as much as others. California, of course, took it and ran with it. And then like even Michigan and Illinois took it and ran with it, where in Maine and Rhode Island, where nearly, unlike California, that's not actually true. They took it and ran with it, but Maine, Rhode Island, Michigan, Illinois, most of their school buses are either what we would call cleaner diesel. So they're 99% more effective in terms of PM, but in terms of CO2, they have some of the highest percentage of EV school buses in the country. So those are examples of where some states took it upon themselves to kind of move forward. That didn't happen because of regulations, but through our voluntary programs.
Okay, I think we have time for 2 more questions.
That's fine.
Before I ask that final question, which is to give us your deep insight, the thing that you want us to remember from today's talk. So we have a question that comes in about MicroTransit. So China has recently created 53,000 e-bike manufacturers. So more factories than workers in the entire US industry. It's 40 times the production of conventional EVs and many times less CO2. So most of these are in Asia or sent to the EU. So does the administration have plans for expanding tiny EVs for the US without receiving them from the other side of the world?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I have no clue what the administration plans to do. I think what I do know is this will be hopefully described in the infrastructure bill. The infrastructure bill will determine what the focus will be. So it'll be nice if folks switch from maybe automobiles and other things and consider other modes of transportation, such as biking and walking and making more complete streets. And I shouldn't use air quotes, that's actually a real term, complete streets. But all of that boils down to infrastructure. And that's been the biggest hurdle with a lot of this work, is that the infrastructure simply is not in place. Our infrastructure is built around gasoline vehicles.
Okay.
And diesel trucks.
So then the last question, and by the way, these are great questions that are coming in.
Great questions.
So what are the wicked problems in transportation that are impeding the just transition to a clean and circular economy? As in, what do we not have a path forward to yet? Yeah.
So the president's goal of a certain number, I don't remember the number offhand, I don't know if it's 30% or 40% of EV sales being automobile sales being EVs by 2030, I think. I don't remember the exact number, but I think it's a 30% or 20%, 30% or 40% of car sales being EVs by 2030. I think it's a great goal. The problem is we don't have the infrastructure to accommodate that many vehicles. So that's a hurdle right there. We don't have the infrastructure in terms of charging networks. So, and then there's equity issues associated with charging as well. And so, well, most people who do have an EV have charging at home, and then meaning they most likely have a garage. So they're probably not living like in an apartment or like any other type of shared housing, or then they have the ability to be able to afford it. EV is still very much a classist concern, which is why equity and environmental justice issues associated with EVs, for example, is a major concern. So that would be one of the bigger hurdles, is just the infrastructure is just not there. You can produce as many vehicles as you want, but the infrastructure is not there. This is why the bill is critical to funding.
Fantastic. So, Britney, thank you so much. I have just launched a poll for our guests, and they are giving us a little bit of feedback on this topic. So thank you very much. I do want to ask that final question. And because you're a CMU alum, I'd love to actually sort of have you put a lens in there in terms of not only for students, but maybe what was valuable to you about your education at a place like Carnegie Mellon. And
yeah,
what is your give us sort of a final statement on what we should all be thinking about collectively.
Yeah, I think what we should all think about is like, what impact do you want to have on the world? I think when I was at Carnegie Mellon, and I know that sounds really generic, but it's the truth. In terms of whatever you choose to do, whatever path you choose to take. When I was at Carnegie Mellon and pursuing the PhD program, I knew I did not want to go into academia. There's nothing wrong with that. I love I love it. The reason is I started at Lafayette, my undergrad, and I came straight to Carnegie Mellon, and I felt like I needed real world experience. I didn't see the value in teaching unless I had the real world experience to actually go out and see the impact and see what I'm actually be able to see the things I'm talking about and seeing the direct impact. So as I'm working on maybe even on like the regulatory aspect of things, I'm working on different issues. I'm able to see, oh, that's the electric school bus we just funded. Like, let's get an opportunity to go back. Or that's the school bus I actually just installed a DLC or DPF on. Can I go back and test it and make sure it's still functioning as indicated, as I actually evaluate the technology to make sure it's working? And so think about what meaning and value do you want to have? I want to be able to go to it. I want to talk to the school boards, nurses of like Arlington, Virginia, to be able to say, this is why you should incorporate an idle reduction program around your school building. That's a small thing, but why those conversations are useful. So trying to find meaning in your work outside of just, collecting your check or, checking a box. So that's what I would encourage overall, because I do love the work that I do here, because I do see the impact, no matter how small and no matter how urgent I know the issues are and how we have a long road ahead, but we have a lot of smart, intelligent people working here, and we hope to acquire new smart, intelligent people here at the agency as well.
Future workforce. So
yes.
Britney McCoy, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you guys.
Putting together the slides and for all of your contributions day in and day out. Clearly, there's a lot of important work, as you mentioned, and you are at the center point. So thank you very much for that. We do have our poll. About half of you have answered our poll this morning. So I'll give you another couple of seconds. I'm buying some time here so you can give us some feedback. And with that, I'll also say thank you again to Britney McCoy. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we will see all of you again on October 14 for our next lecture this fall. And until then, just give us a sign off. Thank you very much. Thanks again. Thanks, everybody.